All right, this episode of the podcast, we've got Om Patel, and we're going to be talking about Agile Coaching and also splitting the atom with my brain. It still hasn't worked, but maybe one day it will. This has been my amazing intro. All right, so I thought we'd start the topic of Agile Coaching. When we had the podcast that Fred was on, I threw out my premise, which was every Scrum Master is an Agile Coach, but not every Agile Coach is actually a Scrum Master. Right, and he agreed with that, and I think it's an interesting theory. I have a lot of theories that are garbage, so I don't know if it really is an interesting theory. So let's start there.
Yeah, so there are so many Agile coaches, and I'm going to use air quotes here, right, that struggle, or I imagine would really struggle if they were put on the floor to become a Scrum Master, even fill in for Scrum Masters. Mm-hmm. And there's a reason for that, because people come up to become an Agile coach from a variety of different means, right? So you could be a developer and work your way up that way. You could be a BA, etc. A Scrum Master who really is worth his salt or her salt, they needed to have put some time into the job, right? Get some variety in terms of different types of teams that you've dealt with, because that hones you as a Scrum Master. So you can have a team that is kind of, really tuned in to the Agile ways of working and Agile practices, and you'd have an easier time, obviously, with that team than you would with a team that's completely novice that you have to bring up. Both of those are learning experiences, right? Yeah. So with a lot of those learning experiences, all you're doing is you're adding depth. But at what point do you become a coach as opposed to a Scrum Master? This is also something that is worth saying. A lot of people will say, well, all Scrum Masters are coaches as well, right? And I'd say maybe, because I've seen a whole bunch of Scrum Masters that cannot coach.
Yeah, well, I just said that. I just said all Scrum Masters are coaches. Like, they're coaches in some way, shape, or form.
Well, they're supposed to be, but they struggle. Because what I've seen a lot of times is people are just way too prescriptive, and they basically take the Scrum Guide and say, this is how it shall be. Mm-hmm. So treat that as a prescription and go, we have to do this, right? I'll give you an example. I've heard Scrum Masters say stand-ups cannot be more than 15 minutes because that's what we do. Yeah. It's like, and when you tell them, no, a stand-up can be whatever the team needs it to be. Yeah. So if it's 20 minutes, fine. If it's a half hour because this team needs a half hour, then let it be. If it's variable, then let it be. So, that's what I've seen, right? And so if they're coaching their teams that every stand-up is only 15 minutes, then I think they're doing the team a disservice.
I want to dig into something that you said, because the path to being a Scrum Master, the path to being an Agile Coach, or Scrum Master, it could be either one, either or. Like, I have a theory that there are only really three paths to being a Scrum Master / Agile Coach. Well, I should just say Agile Coach for the purposes of being straightforward with the conversation. But here's a three that almost everybody I meet fall into. They came from QA, they came from being a business analyst, or they came from being a project where's the camera? They came from being a project manager. This is three. This is the German three. And that's it. That's everybody I see. I don't think I've ever met. I've met one. I know I've met one. Other than the one, I don't think I've ever met a Agile Coach who was a developer, who worked their way through the development ranks, was a technical lead, development lead, whatever, and then they found themselves in Agile Coaching. The people that I've met that have been in that are consultants.
I have come across one or two that have done that. However, they should remain nameless, and they do not make very good coaches because they have a different psyche, being a developer, right? But yeah, I've seen that as well. I largely agree with you. Those are the mainstream kind of areas where people come from to become Scrum Masters or Agile Coaches. Yeah.
QA, BA, or a project manager.
Well, there's another source, which is people take courses and suddenly become Scrum Masters, because let's face it, what does it take to become certified as a Scrum Master? Take a 2-day class and you're done, right? So now you can say, I'm certified and I'm a Scrum Master. Yeah. And I've seen those people, and those are the ones that largely that fall foul of what I was saying earlier, because they learned about some things during their class. That's how it shall be.
Oh, I see.
Forevermore.
I see. So they don't have a background in software development at all. They've sort of like come into it. They've been funneled into it through the class, and maybe they've got their first job and all they know is the doctrine.
Exactly. And worse than that, they've not even worked on Agile teams before.
Right. Yeah.
So these are the people that I call dangerous, right? Because, they're going to do the teams disservice by going and saying, trust me, I'm a certified Scrum Master. This is how we do things, right? And I think we've got to be aware of that.
It's interesting. That's interesting. I don't know if I've ever met anyone. I think I actually have. I think that's a lie. I think we both know somebody who came up like that. Who basically entered straight into the field outside of the software development domain of knowledge. I wonder if the way that you enter into the field of Agile coaching, I wonder if you have a certain set of like things that are beneficial to you as a coach and things that are like detrimental to you. I wonder if you bring certain things along with you, depending on if you're a project manager. I could easily like project management. I could easily see the things that you bring that would be detrimental as a project manager is you start inheriting those, like you bring those command and control things over with you,
Yeah.
I'm gonna let you finish, but I already know one of the things we should let's go through each one and just off the top of our head, the person who's an Agile coach who used to be a project manager. Here's the way that I can spot the people that made that transition, because they can't handle silence. If there's a bit of silence in a meeting, they're going to interject. They're going to talk. They're going to be like, "Oh, well, what about you? Oh, maybe we did this, blah, blah, blah." And they're just like little jibber jabber that doesn't really add anything to the meeting, but they just cannot deal with an uncomfortable silence between team members. They have to fill that space with something. And as soon as I hear that, I'm like, you used to be a project manager, didn't you?
Yeah, that's a good point. So as a reformed project manager, I can certainly concur, but I'd say there are other things that give away, somebody who was a project manager. They tend to be the ones that are focusing on personal accountability versus team accountability, right? So they're the ones that are saying, you are assigned this work, Brian, right? When's it going to be done? Mm-hmm. That is typical of a project manager. When's it going to be done? Somebody who is more team focused would be saying something like, this needs to be done. Who can help with that, right?
Yeah.
And so you're not actually saying you, Brian, are responsible for this or accountable for this. You're saying the team is. Who can get together and get this over the finish line?
Or when somebody throws out like let's say the product owner, for example. Let's say we're walking the board and the number one item is it's in progress. People are working on it. Number two item, things in progress. Number three item, no one's working on it. And I'll come to that one and be like, it doesn't look like anyone's working on this one. And the Scrum Master says, oh yeah, you're right. And no one's. Does anyone have free time? And then there's an uncomfortable silence as a team. Nobody wants to volunteer for anything. And then the Scrum Master will say, well, this person, what are you doing? Can you take this? Can you take this item? Can you pick it up? Project manager.
Absolutely. Or worse yet, assign it to somebody right there and then and say, I'm assigning this to you, Fred or Mary, right? Or whatever. Yeah, that's a project manager for sure.
Of course, the counter to this that people will bring up is, well, if the team hasn't taken it on themselves to pick the work up and assign it to themselves, like somebody needs to be there pushing the team. Somebody needs to be, holding the team accountable to their duty, which is to pick up and take work on their own. That's what somebody would say, that I would expect somebody would say to counter to this.
Absolutely, and that would be a valid counter, right? But some teams don't work that way. Some teams will say, we're going to take on things and get them done, and then we'll take on the next thing in our sprint backlog and get that done, right? And they swarm on it as opposed to put one person's name on it, right? And I had a team just recently actually that did that, and consequently, what happened is nobody would put their name on any work item, and yet things got done because they were swarming on it.
I believe it.
The other thing I should say, the other way you can spot a project manager is in a meeting like that where the product owner is saying, okay, now we've got this other thing that needs to happen over and above what was already planned before, and they say, oh, that's a change, because to them this flags up as a change request, right? And that's a project manager right there.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't want to keep bashing on project managers. My background is in QA. I'm trying to think of the things. I'm trying to think of my shortcomings when I'm in the Scrum Master role. I have none. I'm awesome.
Now, I don't think we're bashing project managers. I think they have some really good attributes. I think that attention to detail is very, very useful, right?
I mean, the benefit is that they are naturally prompting discussions that probably need to happen.
Right.
That's the benefit. I mean, but like let me pivot for a second to the benefit of the BA or the QA person who's become an Agile coach is they are used to BA maybe. Most likely. I don't know. Like BA is still a term that's kind of all over the place in the field, so I don't know. Sometimes they're inside the team, sometimes they're outside the team. Like it's kind of, they're not really included in the Scrum model, so it's difficult to detail. But the QA person for certain, let's assume that they're used to being a member of the development team. They're already going to assume how the team should work. They're already going to know how the team should work, and they're going to already have the expectation. So maybe they would do the same thing that an experienced project manager would do, where they would prompt the conversation as well because they know what a successful team looks like. Again, assuming they have been on successful teams. I don't know.
I can see that. I can also see another track here where somebody who comes from a QA background, they're more likely to assume a certain way of working is the best way of working, because to them, and most commonly, right? And we see this all the time. Is
I could see that
development happens, and
I
then
could see that
work gets passed to QA.
Yeah, that's a valid point. That's one that I didn't think of, which is maybe the people who come from inside the teams are going to bring assumptions of like, this is how the successful teams do it, so this is how we should do it, rather than helping the teams figure out their way and stuff like that.
Exactly. So I think, when you look at people that come from these areas, whether it's development, QA, or BA, whatever, like you said, they bring their perceptions with them, right? And they've worked on teams of various maturity levels, let's say. And every team is unique. So a Scrum Master needs to basically let the team find its own identity and help them do that. It's kind of like growing a plant or something. I don't know, right? You plant something and then you feed it, you nurture it, and it's going to grow differently at different rates than other plants.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. Rather than trying to control how the plant grows, to be like, hey, my other team did sprint plannings this way, or my other team did time boxes this way. Rather than experimenting what works for your other team, to say, my other team did it this way, so you guys should do it this way too. And come across very domineering to the team to tell them how they should be doing things rather than questioning. I will tell you, like, my background is QA, and I already know that this is one of my weaknesses. I know in a Scrum Master role, when I'm in a Scrum Master role, when I'm in a product role, I'm awesome. In a Scrum Master role, I already know this is one of my personal failings, which is I will quickly try to get the team past whatever hurdle is directly in front of them by saying, look, on other teams, because I've been on a million teams. I was on nothing but development teams for 5 years as an independent operator, and then I was a team lead. I was on my own teams, plus I had some kind of visibility to my other team members and the teams that they were on, so I could see how they were doing things, which is great. And then when I was a manager, I was scaled again. But I've seen how many different teams gather what they need to be successful. So to me, it's a toolbox. I'll go into the toolbox and be like, I see you guys doing this. I see you guys being at this stage. I think you need to do this. And I'll strongly recommend that the team does whatever. But I could very easily see that being a huge turnoff to be like, look, I don't need your recommendation. We want to try this. You're recommending something that's counter to what we want to try. Just let us try it. And I could easily see the team grinding against my natural way of saying, hey, maybe we should do whatever, but I'm really kind of telling them,
Yeah, that's a great point. So, I think there's this notion of best practices, right?
Yeah.
And basically what is that? That's a collection of ways to work based on your previous experience.
Yeah.
And so it's very easy for us to fall back on that and say, I've seen this work before, therefore you should do this.
Right.
What we forget is it worked in that circumstance, right, with that team. This is a different team in a different circumstance. So here's my take on this. I've done this as well. I just, when I see something that's not working well, I just say, listen, this XYZ over here, this has worked well in my experience. I'm not suggesting we do exactly that, but I'm suggesting we do something different than what we're doing now, right? What would you like to do? And somebody on the team says, well, we could try that. But then somebody else might say, well, why don't we try a variation of that? Because, our team has this nuance or whatever, right? And that's okay. Let them go that way, because that's exactly right. Their team or your team that you're on right now is different than the previous one that actually succeeded. So you give them the latitude to make those adjustments, right? But, and we've talked about this on previous podcasts as well, I'm a big proponent of experimentation, right? So tell them that this is an experiment, right? And remove their fear of failure and say, let's try it. If it doesn't work, we'll tweak and adjust from there. That's the whole notion of inspect and adapt. So encourage them to do that. Now, what happens if that does work or doesn't work even? You need to now add that to your memory bank as best practices. Best practices, what not to do or what to do, right? I guess I shouldn't call it best practice if it's something you don't do. But in my experience, it's hardly ever the case where, something completely fails. There's usually some attribute that you can say, okay, it failed because of this. And then you change that. You change some variables and you try a new experiment. Now that succeeds. That is the best practice for that team in those circumstances.
Yeah, I think you just hit on something. Like we should come out with. We should have a document repository or something like I don't know, like on a shared drive or Dropbox or something like that, where we just keep like the best of, because what you were just talking about, like an experiment log, like these are the experiments after. If I was a Scrum Master in an organization, and I was just starting or whatever, and let's say I had whoever my hiring manager was, I don't know who I work for as a Scrum Master in an organization. Maybe it's another Scrum Master, maybe it's a scaled Scrum Master. I don't know who it would be. That's separate from this discussion. It would be nice if they had something like that. To be like, show me your experiment log, or maybe like if your retrospective items that come out of your retrospectives, they don't go into your normal backlog, assuming they even go into your backlog at all. They don't go into your normal backlog. They go into a experimentation backlog that's managed by like your boss or your boss's boss, who's another Scrum Master or Agile Coach, whatever, right? And then those experiments are controlled just like normal stories are controlled. You have success, failure, whatever. Maybe we tried it and it didn't work. We tried it, whatever. I'm trying to brainstorm for just a different way of dealing with this, to come up with an idea to encourage Scrum Masters that work for me to any natural tendencies that I have, a natural tendency to say that like, oh, I'm right because I've seen it done before this way or whatever, and kind of push you away from that to say, well, you might be right, yes, but you can put it in your experimentation log and say that you tried to do it, and then you can have the team like 360 review it and tell you how well they think it's working anonymously. Maybe there's a strategy for this.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of merit for us to, come up with some sort of a repo of these things. But I think if you're especially if you're on a scaled program with multiple teams, it is invaluable for all the teams to be able to look at a repo of experiments. Because if a team has tried an experiment, there's a lot of stuff that you can learn from it.
Yeah.
And that only works really well if you encourage the team to log everything, meaning experiments that succeeded, but just as importantly, experiments that did not, because rather than think of an experiment as a quote unquote failure, right? I skirt around that and say, no, it is a success because we proved a null hypothesis in this case.
Right.
So that is the kind of angle that I expound on with my teams, is say, we think this is a hypothesis that may work. Let's try and prove it. On the other hand, this is a null hypothesis that let's try and disprove that, right? So I think it's a great idea. Let's noodle on how we can do that so we can share it with everybody. It'll have to be something that is completely genericized and anonymized, but I think we can come up with something.
I think so too. I think we can come up with some kind of like experimentation log or something like that. That's like a scaled, so you can see it across all the Scrum Masters that work together. We probably beat up the path to Agile coaching enough, and we're kind of on the topic now of the alignment in the organization of Scrum Masters, because we're kind of talking about scale Scrum, like the example that I just gave. In the example that I just gave, where I'm in a Scrum Master organization, like a team Scrum Master, and I work for a scaled Scrum Master, not only do I work for them like in the matrix, this way and this way, matrix. In the matrix, maybe I also work for them on paper. Maybe they're my resource manager, hiring manager, whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
Because I know you're triggering you with the word resource manager. Maybe I work for them. Maybe they were writing my performance reviews, that kind of stuff, which is outside of the bounds of what we're trying to talk about here. Anyway, the point of that is, what is the ideal scenario? Let's say I hired you in. Let's say I was a CEO, and I hired you in, Om, and I hired you in, and I was like, you're my chief agility officer, CAO. Chow. You're my chow.
Chow.
With the A with a little squiggly or dots or whatever it is. And I tell you, look, I need you to organize my matrixed culture / environment company in the best way that you could choose to. Like, how would you organize my Scrum Masters within the organizational structure? Where would they sit? Where would they be? Because assuming every Scrum Master has the ability to be an Agile coach, or maybe you don't call them Scrum Masters, maybe you call them all that. I don't know. Maybe you call them all Agile coaches. I don't know what you would do. What would you do in that instance?
So first of all, this idea that Scrum Masters, really, it applies to any role, really, right?
Sure.
Are borrowed from a matrixed organization, within the company. Yeah. This is, I think, ridden with issues, okay? Because people are borrowed from one area of the organization into another, and oftentimes internally there's cross charges and this and that. So if you go back to the original premise, you hired me to come in as the CEO, first thing I would do is simply stand up a lightweight Agile practice office.
Sure.
Right? Just want to be clear, this is not a PMO, right? Now, I'll repeat this for those in the back. Not a PMO. An Agile practice office is an office that is very lightweight. It has a collection of team members with various skill sets, right? So let's say you have all of these people that are Scrum Masters working for the Agile practice office as such. Now you don't have this issue about cross-charging anymore, right? You're now bringing people from the Agile practice office into a project that's going on. Again, that's the other thing I would do is get rid of that word and call them initiatives, but it doesn't matter. So that's, I think, a fundamental step, right?
I 100%, like, listen, I've cut the word project out of my repertoire. As a consultant, when I'm deployed to clients, I do not say project. And whenever somebody mentions project, I tell them, no, this initiative is sticking around forever. This product is sticking around forever. Unless that's not true, unless we truly are doing a one-time throwaway code type of deal. Like the database migration that you mentioned one time is like, we're going to do database migration from X location to Y location, and once 100% of the things at Y location, then we're going to cut all the staff and everyone's going home.
But that's still an initiative with a finite duration, right?
Yeah.
It's just, I think the words matter here, right? So
I think they do. Yeah. I think, you're right.
Yeah. So that's the first thing I would do, right? To your point, is just reorganize how people are, they're reporting lines essentially.
Yeah.
And if you do just that, right, then I think that's a good start. Now, as far as the titles go, whether you call them Agile Coaches, whether you call them Scrum Masters, if they're in the Agile Practice Office, I'd be very tempted to call everybody who is in the Agile Practice Office Agile Practitioners.
Sure.
That's it, right? So a BA who is there, who maybe has good tendencies to become a Scrum Master, they're an experienced BA. why would they be just labeled and siloed into this thing called a BA, right?
Yeah.
So they're agile practitioners with skills. And the last thing I want to finish with is you wouldn't necessarily pick people from that pool based on any given title, because everybody has the same title, right? So you would afford them the opportunity to sign on to the projects that they want to be on. And initiatives, I just quote myself saying projects again, but hard habit to break. But yes, definitely. So, just tell them about it and say, this is a challenge, who's up for it, right? And then whoever puts their hand up, they're the ones that get to go to that project or initiative.
Well, the other thing is you might have people that you need to deploy for different reasons. I mean, again, if you hire a BA, knowing they're a BA, and you have a team that really needs help writing good requirements, maybe they have junior developers, maybe they have new team members, maybe they're mobile developers, maybe you have a PO that's never written good stories or whatever. You need to deploy a BA to the group for a couple of months to kind of teach them. I like the idea of flattening. You're an Agile practitioner. You work for this office. You work for this group. Everyone is flattened. Everyone's Agile practitioners. You have specialities, but only your boss, your leadership in the group know what your specialities are. And then you get around where you are needed. So they deploy you as a fixer for whatever group needs fixing or assistance or training or help. You're deployed for a certain amount of time to help that group. And like I think that's a great idea. I think that's a great concept, because that is a concept of an Agile team. It's a concept of the development team. That's that T shape. It's like, you're not great at writing requirements? Good. Okay, no problem. I'm going to bring a person in who's fantastic at writing requirements. I'm going to deploy him with your team for the next 3 months.
Right.
And when they leave, they will leave you with that skill, hopefully. They will leave you better off with that skill than when you were there. Same thing as if, my team doesn't know, my team's not great at .NET or whatever. My team's not great at whatever. You wouldn't think twice to do this with any programming language. My team takes care of the website, but they don't really know JavaScript that well. But now, they're going to take ownership of a piece of the website that's real heavy in JavaScript. Let me add a JavaScript engineer to the team, a JavaScript expert to the team for a couple months, kind of help everyone, teach everyone, pair program with them. I don't know why this is such a revelation, and what, you know what I mean? Like,
I think it's just because we've grown up with, these individual titled silos, right?
Yeah.
And people become very much I-shaped instead of T-shaped. I think also, if you think about this concept of the flat hierarchy, it lends a lot of efficiency to this whole thing, because now, if you take certain roles, like, for example, an architect or a UI UX person, right?
Right.
You need fewer of those people, because you can now have those people cycle through and disseminate knowledge in the teams that they're going through, right? So, overall, I think this has the potential to be a very efficient system.
To get back to what we were saying, like, okay, so you have everyone's Agile practitioners. I want to go over to this diagram, this coaching in a nutshell diagram here. So in this graphic, the green circle in the middle is individual Scrum Masters that sit on a single team. That's I think that's what it is intended to be. The way that I interpret it is people who are not actual Scrum Masters, people who are just like part-time, pulling the role part-time, or my favorite thing to say, playing the role part-time.
Yeah.
That's
I think it
diminutive,
could be
the diminutive.
Right.
Playing the role.
I think this graphic could encompass both, actually, right?
Yeah.
So the little green circle, even though I believe the Dandy People, this is brought to us courtesy of Dandy People.
I love Dandy People.
I think that they mean Scrum Master, but they're not using the words. That's fine. But it could also mean, to your point, somebody who's playing the role of a Scrum Master part-time while they have another role part-time, right? In theory, part-time, but in practice, it's often
that's the way I read
not the case.
That's the way I read it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the second tier, the Agile Coach tier, I consider that the full-time, the job role Scrum Master. That's what I consider, because it's a middle management. Like in my brain, I shuffle the Scrum Masters into middle management. In between teams, it says in between teams, because they're I don't know why they have a bullet point for teams. Anyway, I'm assuming this means the green circle is somebody who's just on a single team.
Right.
And the yellowish, I don't really know what the middle one is. The middle tier is people that are on more than one team. That's why I'm assuming that's why they mean middle management.
Yeah. I believe that's correct. Yes, they're saying teams plural, right?
And then what they call enterprise agile coaches would be what I was putting you in the role of, to say, hey, I'm the CEO. I want to hire you on as my chief agility officer, and you have it could be chief agility officer, but it could be a director of agile practice or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So titles aside, I mean, the point I think of that blue outer circle is that person who they're calling enterprise agile coach is not working anymore at the team level or the team's level. They're working at a level that's above that, right? So above middle management, they're looking at leadership. They're looking at various business domains other than just the one, that the team is working on. And also their focus is no longer just simply agile practices. Their focus is on organizational structures and organizational culture.
Yeah. I feel we could do a whole podcast on what is a Scrum Master's job, a Scrum Master / Agile Coach, because for the purposes of this discussion, they're just Agilists, right? What is a Scrum Master's job when they're partnered in the organization at the C level, right? How are they proceeding to try to change the culture? What metrics are they trying to move forward? What initiatives are they trying to move forward? It's a separate podcast of what we're talking about now, but it's sort of related, because now we're talking about like agile coaches at different levels. We're talking about an agile coach who works for one team. We call that a Scrum Master. An agile coach who works for, 1, 2, 3 teams. Maybe they flex, to 3 teams, 4 teams. When you have like teams that are splitting, or they're trying to hire another person in, or whatever, temporarily they're stretching, right? People quit, stuff like that. Temporarily they're stretching. Those agile coaches deployed as multiple team Scrum Masters. Also, agile coaches deployed as scaled Scrum Masters, and when you have some complex situations going on. But then you have agile coaches deployed as leaders who they're not connected to teams. They're connected to the leadership. But again, to me, this is back to the point that I started the whole thing with, which was Fred's point, which is you should have a Scrum Master coupled up with your leadership up here, who also maybe could serve scaled, maybe not. Like, it's arguable, I guess. Trying to save money, trying to save a couple bucks. But the idea up here is they're trying to make your roadmaps visible. They're trying to make your entire scaled operation visible. They're trying to consolidate those metrics and translate them to the highest levels of the organization. They're trying to seek every opportunity they can to introduce organizational agility to the groups and organizations, sub-organizations inside of your larger organization that have not yet adopted it. Training, mentoring, coaching, stuff like that.
It is really quite a transition, actually, for somebody who is an agile coach at the multiple teams level or the scaled teams level, from there to become an enterprise agile coach.
Right.
And the reason behind that is you're no longer thinking about agile practices. I'm going to put an asterisk on that because I want to come back to that in a second. But what you're doing is you're looking at different things. You're looking at the organization's values. You're looking at the mission, right? And then looking at everything that's happening within the organization by domain, and really dissecting whether the current practices that are being followed in those domains, agile or not, whatever they're doing, how are they contributing to the mission and the values of the organization? That's what you're really trying to do. So that's the first thing, right? And then the second thing after that, what you're really trying to do, if you're doing it justice, is you're identifying things that aren't working as waste. You're identifying things that they're not doing as potential opportunities and aligning those. Now I'm going to go back to the asterisk, right? So just because you're an enterprise coach doesn't mean you're not following sound agile principles. You still are. Right. An example would be when you're dealing with the C-level executives and you're working with them on initiatives, et cetera, that they should be working on, you would still create a backlog, right? They would work out of a backlog. You would make sure that you time box those those initiatives that they're doing. So these are agile principles still,
Right,
time boxing, using a backlog, etc. You would prioritize that backlog. And then the other thing that's quite important as well is even at that level, you will have retrospectives. The reasoning behind that is that the C-level people get to understand and reflect back upon the process that they're following and improve on it, just like the teams would. So you're not abandoning agile practices as such. You're just applying those at a different level, while at the same time not necessarily thinking, that the development team level thinking, you don't have that. What you have instead is work that's being produced or not produced that contributes to the value chain. Is the value chain, is it real? And what's contributing to each step of the value chain so that it culminates in whatever the organization really stands for?
Yeah.
That is a difficult transition to make. And it's one that, to be perfectly honest, if you're an aspiring enterprise agile coach, be prepared to fall on your feet a few times before you realize how to do this right. There's no book that you can read that just makes you a superstar in this field. You've got to fall over a few times and then realize what you didn't do right and inspect from there and adapt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the interesting part from that is I just had a thought in my head about my personal experience, which was the first time I was deployed as a Scrum Master on a contract at the C level, not at a team level. I really had a light bulb moment because I was like, I need to divorce myself from Scrum, because Scrum doesn't matter at the executive level. The Kanban it fit perfectly. As someone who had only been working at a team level and who had majority of the time been working in Scrum, I worked on a few Kanban teams, but the majority of the time it was Scrum. It was interesting for me to be in a position to say, well, what works the best for this team, this executive team? They were a team, right? They were a team with their own teams. It was like a scaled type of thing. Sure. I had to kind of put myself in that mindset. But Kanban worked extremely well at that level. And most executives, they do work off of a Kanban style way of working. I don't know a good way to say
list
it.
At a very
they really
minimum.
do. But the majority of them, they don't have anything written down. They're just kind of shooting from the hip. It seems like they're shooting from the hip, but if you actually put their initiatives that they're involved in on a board with a swim lane for each of them, operations, finance, executive, whatever, and you put stickies under each of them, these are the operations that you're leading, like their whole organization quickly comes into focus, very quickly, and you start seeing they have a clarity. That's what I did with it. I was like, this is your executive Kanban board, and it can sit in the CEO's office, and then every 2 days, 3 days, whatever. For us, it was like a Monday, Wednesday, I don't remember what it was, like two times a week. We'd meet in the CEO's office and go over what we have in flight. When I was in there, I was in the position at that point where I was the only product manager meaning I dealt with customers and I dealt with the team, the development teams. I dealt with both. Eventually, they may have split that role into some kind of chief product officer or something like that, and then they would have stepped in to take that place. But again, I was a consultant at that point in time. As far as visibility and kind of talking through where the organization is going, I can't imagine what they were doing before they had something like that in place.
They were muddling through, I bet.
They were. They were to the organization's testament. They were getting things done. It's just, does everyone feel like they're on the same page?
Right.
Not even that. It's like, once everything is visible, you don't even know what you can start helping with.
Yeah.
Maybe I can help with that. Maybe I can, do whatever.
And not everything that they're doing when you walk in there warrants being on that board. So this is what.
That's true.
Before you populate that board, you would do a value stream map and figure out exactly what is important, right, and what is not important, just as critical, and remove those. So that's that lean principle of removing waste, and then whatever's left is the valuable work that goes on the board to be executed. To your point about meeting regularly, whatever cadence you were using, that's kind of like the stand-up almost, right? Yeah. Of course, it's Kanban, but you definitely do want to do that so that there's this imperative, this mindset of, we're going to get back together in X days to revisit this. Yeah. So whoever owns those things in those columns and rows, they're not going to just leave them there in the hope that someone's going to pick them up. They're going to have to move them along.
Right.
And that's where we can use the enterprise Agile Coach to say, this has been here a while, right?
Yeah.
The other thing that the enterprise coach would do is to enforce limits, like work in process and so on, to make sure that there's a decent, consistent flow, I guess, right?
I want to stop for a second, and I want to talk about what's it called? The Agile Coach Competency Framework. I want to talk about this one, right? So this is the Agile and Lean Practitioner Coaches Competency Framework. So you have content on the left, you have process on the right, and domain. Domain's a part of it. So there's, I guess, just 3 sides, theoretically. Mm-hmm. So teaching and mentoring kind of go together. That makes sense to me. I kind of feel in my professional career, I'm better at these on the left, teaching and mentoring, rather than coaching and facilitating. Because I've met people that are excellent at asking questions to get you to where you want to be, to pull the answers out of you, and facilitating goes along in that along. You know, if coaching, aka asking questions to get you to where you want to be, is in the driver's seat, facilitating is in the passenger seat right in the front. You know what I mean? I'm in the back kind of being like, well, where are we going? But like teaching and mentoring, again, the same thing. I feel I'm way better at teaching and mentoring than I am at professional coaching and facilitating.
Yeah. And so this is the model that Lisa Atkins put together on the Agile Coaching Institute website. This has been around for a bit now. Mm-hmm. And to your point, so most people who have knowledge, right, that they want to share are either teaching or mentoring, right? Teaching is imparting that knowledge to others. Yeah. And mentoring is basically telling them, it's telling.
Yeah, right? I got this. The Dandy People website again has a little bit more in depth expansion on it.
Yeah, so mentoring is basically what has worked in my experience is XYZ is what you're doing. Mm-hmm. But on the other side, meaning the right side of the picture there, vertically, right? The professional coaching and facilitating. So most Scrum Masters, Agile Coaches are facilitators, but they're not professional coaches. Mm-hmm. And there's a big distinction there. Professional coaching isn't about facilitating, mentoring, teaching, about material, anything technical to do with Agile. Mm-hmm. Professional coaching is really on the premise that the person, the coachee, has the capacity to arrive at their own conclusion. They just need clarity of mind. Right. And what you're doing is asking the right questions and letting them work their thoughts through until they arrive at a solution, right? But as a professional coach, you have no idea what that solution is going to be at the outset. Mm-hmm. So you're not thinking about driving the coachee to any specific direction, much less an end, right? So that's what that is. A lot harder in practice to do that than it seems. The mastery domains at the bottom there. I believe what Lisa is really kind of extolling is the fact that one's only ever good at one of those things. It's very difficult to be a master on the technical side, on the technical domain, as well as business domain or transformation domain. So find where your niche is, excel in that, and then once you've got to the point where you are a master, however you decide that, you can then say, okay, now I'm interested in something else, and you can start, foraying into that other domain, so to speak.
Hey, Jessica. That's so weird.
Welcome.
How'd you sneak into this?
Another guest.
When we originally threw that up, I was like, I'm not sure about that. But now that I think about it, how many domains can you master? How many different business segments can you master? Or if you're a change agent, how good can you get at that while ignoring everything else, or not ignoring everything else, but like not having to deal with anything else? It kind of makes sense to me, actually.
Yeah, given how long it takes to become a master, however you're defining that, it does make sense to.
I don't like the word master at all.
I know.
Yeah.
I know, because the opposite is, what if you're not a master? What are you?
A slave.
Exactly, right? That's why I don't like that term.
All right, well, we've been canceled. All right, well, this is a good episode. I feel we only got through 2 of 15 of our points. But thanks, Hill. Thanks for walking through coaching. I think we need to do a second session of coaching. We have a lot of content here.
We do. And we can go a long way down on that model, trying to kind of cover it. And this is probably not doing it justice. So
fantastic.
Stay tuned, everybody, for another episode.
Okay, so Agile Podcast questions at Gmail. I remembered to do the thing.
Absolutely.
And like and subscribe. Subscribe to the
There you
video.
go. And
please.
put your comments and give us topics you want to talk about
And write us angry tweets.
down below.
Angry tweets.
Whoa, how did you get here?
I'm still here.
Oh my goodness.